Right. Well, once again, a very good morning and good afternoon to our distinguished speakers, our distinguished moderator, for being with us today on this webinar titled Afghanistan, Central Asia, Prospects and Challenges in Bilateral Cooperation on Security and Peace. My name is Mariam Safi. I'm the Executive Director of the Organization for Policy Research and Development Studies, and I'm thrilled to have you all with us, and I'd like to express my gratitude to each of you for joining us today. With us today, we have quite a wonderful group of speakers with us. We have with us Dr. Roman Mogilevsky, Ms. Annie Jasmine Fowler, Ms. Jennifer Brigg Murtashev Bailey, and of course our moderator, Ms. Shabnam Nassimi. It is my great privilege to introduce our moderator for today's session to you all. Ms. Nassimi is the Executive Director of Conservative Friends of Afghanistan, and her academic background and expertise lies in the area of international security, global governance, and law. Ms. Nassimi, I would like to hand over the panel to you now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Safi Seb, for inviting me to moderate this very timely discussion, and good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. It's definitely my pleasure to be part of this event and together with our distinguished guests. The central focus of this webinar, as you can see from the title, will be the prospects and challenges towards cooperation on peace and security that Central Asia can bring to Afghanistan. As many of you know, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and other Central Asian republics have already had deep historical and cultural ties to the country and are increasingly important economic relations with Afghanistan. Meanwhile, Afghanistan's President Ashraf Ghani has put forward a vision of Afghanistan as a roundabout for Asia, linking the markets and people of Central and South Asia in mutual prosperity. The ongoing efforts to establish enduring peace in the country is very much a key focal point. And there will need to be extensive regional support and consensus for from Afghanistan's northern neighbors. And given the increased challenges brought on by COVID-19's pandemic, and regional cooperation is more critical than ever to ensure peace and stability throughout the region and Afghanistan. Several Central Asian countries have already become involved in the peace process. Uzbekistan has played a constructive role in recent efforts for peace by hosting the Tashkent conference of major international parties, which reaffirmed strong support for intra-Afghan talks with the Taliban without preconditions. And in recent years, Kazakhstan has also provided trade and aid to support key economic and social initiatives in Afghanistan for higher education, essential goods, and infrastructure. And so today's discussion aims to create an engaging environment that allows for a rich discussion between policymakers, academia, and regional counterparts on which mutual interests can be redefined in the pursuit of better cooperation and coordination on peace and security matters between Central Asian countries and Afghanistan. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists. We have today joining us Ms. Jennifer Brigg Murtashev, who is the director for the Center of Governance and Markets and associate professor of the International Affairs at the University of Pittsburgh. She is the author of 2 books on Afghanistan, Informal Order and State in Afghanistan, and Land, the State and War, Property Rights and Political Order in Afghanistan. She has extensive experience living in both Uzbekistan, where she served as a democracy and governance officer for USAID, and Afghanistan, where she has conducted extensive fieldwork in rural areas. We also have Dr. Roman Mogilevsky, who is the Associate Director and Senior Research Fellow for the Institute of Public Policy Administration at the University of Central Asia, and the Executive Director of the Central for Social and Economic Research in Kyrgyzstan. He has extensive experience researching trade policy, public finance, labor market, social policy, and macroeconomics in Central Asian and Eastern European countries. Dr. Rehman has held advisory positions for the government of Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and has worked as a consultant for many international organizations, such as the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, UNDP, UNICEF, etc. We also finally have Miss Anne Jasmine Falha, who is the founder and managing director of ATR Consulting in Afghanistan. Previously, she was the advisor to the Minister and Deputy Minister of Programs at Afghanistan's Ministry of Rural Rehabilitation and Development. And prior to this, she was the acting head of the Resident Coordinator's Office of the UN Assisted Mission in Afghanistan. She holds a graduate degree in international administration from Pantheon-Sorbonne University in Paris in France. And her publications include study on security cooperation in the Heart of Asia region, published by the Asia Foundation. And she's been based in Afghanistan since 2003. We will begin with asking each of the panelists to give us an 8-minute presentation covering 3 main questions. And I will begin by asking Ms. Mortazevishvili to cover, present her insight on the subject, and to keep in mind that these 3 sort of key areas in terms of how she would describe the security cooperation between Afghanistan and Uzbekistan, what the existing challenges preventing improved cooperation between Afghanistan and Uzbekistan are, and what role can Central Asian countries play in facilitating a sustainable peace process in Afghanistan, and whether this can be improved. I'll start with you, Jennifer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. It's a real honor to be here, and I'm so very grateful for the invitation. And it's a very interesting time to be talking about these issues, especially with regard to Uzbek, Central Asian Afghan relations. For many, many years, this wasn't really a topic. There wasn't really much to discuss because Central Asia was simply a corridor for US military personnel and equipment to and from into Afghanistan. Much of that has changed in recent years, and this change is really because of the incredible reforms that have taken place in Uzbekistan over the past 4 years. As many of you know, in 2016, long-serving President Islam Karimov passed away. He was succeeded by Shavkat Mirziyoyev. Mirziyoyev immediately instituted a number of domestic and international reforms, but his international reforms have actually been probably his greatest success and much more deep than many of the domestic reforms that he's done. He opened relations. So what is important about this for the peace process? Uzbekistan has opened up its relationships with every other country in the region. Prior to 2016, it was almost impossible to travel from Uzbekistan to other countries in the region, especially Afghanistan. There was like a brick wall, larger than a brick wall between these countries. There just wasn't very much relations between them. In fact, I don't think I can't think of the last time an Uzbek foreign minister visited Kabul in the past 20 years. That changed quite suddenly in 2016. The Uzbek foreign ministry has been very, very active and has, I think, crafted a very humane policy towards Afghanistan. They have been very involved in the peace process, encouraging intra-Afghan talks, as was noted, without any preconditions. This also really changes the regional dynamics. So there's several things that are really important about this. First of all, the reforms in Uzbekistan and the fact that it's opened up its relationships, not just with Afghanistan, but with all of the other countries in the region, creates an opportunity to make Uzbekistan really a hub for economic growth and prosperity in the region. It touches on every other country in Central Asia, including Afghanistan. It helps Afghanistan achieve its vision, this Heart of Asia vision where Afghanistan really is a hub that links Central and South Asia together. It makes all of these things quite possible. And this is really, I think it's quite surprising And several years ago, this would have been very unexpected. So it's having a very positive impact, I think, on the peace process. Now, what does that mean? You know, there's also, we must also consider how people perceive this. And for many, many years in Uzbekistan, Afghanistan was just seen as a security threat. The government saw it as a security threat. It was seen through one lens, and that was terrorism. And so people in Uzbekistan were terrified of Afghans. They knew very little about the country. There were no links between people despite common language, common history, common culture, and so forth. That has really changed in the past 4 years. You see so many Afghans now visiting Tashkent, doing business, engaged in exchange. This could really change. This has enormous potential to promote greater regional integration. I think Uzbekistan in many ways serves as a new kind of model for Afghanistan. As Afghanistan looks to its neighbors about what kind of economy does it want to have, what does it want to look like, there really haven't been many dynamic models in the region. So this is potentially one option. Of course, this really depends on how far President Mirziyoyev goes in his reforms, and that really remains unclear. One other aspect I think that we really need to consider, and that is the role of the United States in all of this. We can't really talk about Uzbek-Afghan relations without talking about some of the role that the United States has had in promoting a trilateral relationship between the three. So the US has been, as we all know, very active in supporting this peace process and has really encouraged the Uzbek government to be more involved. So it's providing, you know, encouraging the Uzbek government and entrepreneurs to be more active in investing, more active in trade, and also more active in developing infrastructure projects like the cargo port at Termez. There's an airport at Navoiy in Uzbekistan that could serve sort of as a regional hub for Afghanistan. So in this way, Uzbekistan can become an alternative to the transport links that go south. So Uzbekistan can see itself as sort of this new regional trade hub that can promote possibly greater trade between, that can provide a vehicle for Afghanistan to promote its exports to another market. It increases the options for Afghanistan, and potentially this could have enormous economic effects for Afghanistan, as it could lower prices on many commodities. It could provide real opportunities for trade. So I think that it's a very optimistic time. Of course, the one issue that really remains unresolved, there still remains a number of Uzbek fighters inside of Central Asia. This is still, I wouldn't say it's a bit of a sticking point, but it's something that we don't hear a lot about. It remains unresolved. But these were sort of the legacies of the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan that ended up in Afghanistan, and they still remain in Afghanistan. And actually, for the first time over the past several years, we've seen them in Uzbek majority areas inside of Afghanistan. Previously, you know, they were in the east, but now they're in places like Tahar. There's questions of how do you let these fighters go home? Is there possibility of reconciling them? We don't want to overestimate their prowess or their power, but they certainly could serve as a destabilizing force. So it's also something to keep our eyes on in the years to come. But lots of opportunities, lots of positive changes that we're seeing take place that could really affect the dynamic between these two countries and Central Asia as a whole.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that very positive outlook for the role that Uzbekistan can play in Afghanistan's future. I would like to now ask Dr. Roman to provide us his presentation on the subject matter, and now focusing more on Central Asia as a whole in terms of their security cooperation with Afghanistan, the existing challenges that may exist between Afghanistan and Central Asia, both historically, culturally, and security-wise, and what role do you think Central Asian countries can provide moving forward, or play in establishing a sustainable peace process in Afghanistan? And moving forward, I think one of the things that we don't tend to look at is once we actually come to an agreement with the Taliban, what kind of Afghanistan are we trying to establish, and what is the what will be the aftermath of this peace process, and how can Central Asia play that significant role in helping Afghanistan reach that?
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. First of all, I think I need to introduce my organization to explain what do we do it, what is the topic I'm going to mostly discuss. University of Central Asia is an international university established simultaneously in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyz Republic, and Tajikistan by international treaty between presidents of those countries and His Highness the Aga Khan. And we also are very much active in Afghanistan, neighboring country, because, well, we have a very big collaboration agenda with the government and people of Afghanistan. Our view of the issues in Afghanistan is that one of the important components of peace building should be through focusing on normal development agenda. We really feel that if you discuss only threats coming around Afghanistan, that's not a very positive type of approach. Instead, we find that people in Afghanistan, in government, in civil society, in research community, appreciate if we talk about normal development. We talk about economic development, we talk about education, capacity building, and similar things. That's very much appreciated. Secondly, what I would like to say is that Central Asia, in a way, is in a advantageous position to talk with Afghanistan, because we are not big, we are not have no capacity, neither willingness to dominate. So, but we are very much interested in peace in Afghanistan and in fruitful collaboration with this country. So we are really, and also importantly, and that brings me to what we are doing. We believe that Central Asia has a lot of experience to offer to Afghanistan. We are not developed countries. We still have plenty of issues. And from that perspective, learning from Central Asian experience for Afghanistan is much more feasible than learning from developed countries' experience. So, okay, you take officials to the study tour in Sweden, and they see how well it is organized there. Great, interesting. Can you borrow that experience? Not necessarily. Well, if you go to Kyrgyzstan or Tajikistan, two countries the closest in terms of economic development of Afghanistan, and not so far away from Afghanistan. Of course, they enjoy peace, but otherwise, it's also a lot of issues. People from Afghanistan can learn what reforms worked, what reforms have serious implications for different aspects, etc., etc. And we are now talking not about so much about, again, like security in narrow sense, but rather in terms of economic reforms, tax system, social security or social protection systems, and etc., etc. Well, from that perspective, UCA started its collaboration with government of Afghanistan, and most recently our collaboration is with the Ministry of Finance of Afghanistan, with support of International Development Research Center, the research arm of the Canadian government. We conducted a large research and capacity building program in Afghanistan, providing the ministry staff executive master in economic policy. So that's very first program of that kind, which really addresses the needs of capacity building of staff in Afghanistan. Well, that's exactly when we started to talk to the ministry, we found out that unfortunately the analytical capacity in this ministry, and I believe in other ministries even less so, is kind of similar to what it should be in a normal situation. So you really need a lot of analytical work to do in order to improve functioning of the government. And Ministry of Finance is absolutely central from that perspective inside the government. That's the main thinking body, if you wish, or at least it should be. And at least, so we implemented this executive master program, which is 60 credits, 1 year, 12 months program. We had resources to deliver it twice, and altogether we have more than 50 graduates. It was done in 2018, 2020. We delivered that through face-to-face and online kind of blended learning process. So we had sessions in Kyrgyzstan. Well, Kyrgyzstan is arguably one of the countries in Central Asia which is the easiest to access for people in Afghanistan. That's the reason. And also we are based in Kyrgyzstan. So that's determines the choice of the location. So we took them 3 times a year for altogether 11 weeks. And in between these 3 visits, they also do their homework and they stay in touch with our instructors through email and sometimes if connection allows through online sessions, but it doesn't always allow, to be frank. We pay also very much attention to have it kind of properly balanced. For example, of our graduates, 38% are women, and trust me, it was a bit of an effort from our side to ensure that we have enough women among the participants, and they showed to be quite successful participants, let me say. This was really a big plus for the programs that we had them among the students. So the program appeared to be quite popular. If first time it was mostly kind of unknown business, and we had necessary but not huge number of applications. For the second wave, we received more than 200 applications for like 20 something places only. So it's seems to be of interest for many government officials in Afghanistan. In addition to that, we have few people from civil society, but very few. We also, part of the program, we try to not to just teach them a standard course of different economic policies like trade policy, public finance, mining, agriculture, sustainable development, all of that. But also we try to introduce substantial regional content into that. So we don't teach things which we believe are not applicable in the context of the conflict affected and relatively poor country, but rather inserting a lot of evidence from Central Asian experience, which we believe is of more direct interest for our learners. We published a number of papers, and one of the research papers that's probably the reason why I'm talking now, is we published a paper on the role of women in economic development of Afghanistan, co-authored by our research fellow and our learners who were very interested and contributed a lot into the production of the paper. And well, just to conclude on this program so far, I believe that we now would like to have it as a kind of permanently offered program. We see so much demand. We, of course, will look for other modalities. For example, we would like to partially offer it in Kabul in cooperation with academics from Afghanistan. But in this way, we believe that Central Asia can contribute constructively into peace process in Afghanistan, not so much with money, but with our experience and goodwill and openness. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mogilevsky, for that insightful overview of the way that Afghanistan and Central Asian countries can work together in terms of academical exchanges. I would like to now finally ask Ms. Falha to provide us her brief presentation of about 8 minutes, and to focus on, again, quite similarly around Central Asian countries and some of the security cooperation that Afghanistan can work together with Central Asian countries to establish, the challenges that you believe continue to exist, and whether there are any opportunities in facilitating the peace process, and what active role these Central Asian countries can play in the ongoing peace process that we are actively trying to establish.
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for the opportunity, and hello, everyone. I'll try to build on the very interesting points that my colleagues have raised, and try to turn also the very positive opportunities that they highlighted to see how this could play into supporting peace and security. First of all, I mean, I'm going to focus mostly on the radicalization and violent extremism, how it shapes right now not only Afghanistan but central states. It has at least some impact that are sometimes unfortunately visible. It should remain a priority to combat radicalization and violent extremism. I think it has to remain a priority. We might believe that the fact that negotiations are happening with the Taliban might actually bring more, stability in the region, but it might also, on the contrary, embolden, jihadist groups who believe that, the narrative within the circles is that violence worked, and the Taliban are gaining, power in Afghanistan. So it might embolden those groups even further, and so it is really, really important that Central Asian states, Afghanistan, really work together to combat this threat. It also, those negotiations might also bring this idea that, the strategic positioning of those groups could be reinforced around Afghanistan, since the Taliban would actually be, part of the government and could be an ally, not in the medium terms, obviously, because the Taliban have promised that they would cut the ties with any terrorist groups, but at least could, position themselves, strengthen their position in Central Asia to actually build this relation with this government, which, if negotiations work, will have Taliban within it. I also see one reason to see the threat as significant is the fact that, okay, societies in the region are weak in a way because they've been vulnerable, let's say. They're not weak, but they're vulnerable to narrative from extremists, from literalists who view, who use Islam really as a way to promote violence. And it will be even more so with the COVID-19 crisis, which will bring a major economic impact. So, with all of this in mind, this cooperation on combating radicalization is all the time really, really timely. What have been the responses so far in the region, in Central Asia? The responses have been shaped by the Russian or Chinese model, which is relatively authoritarian, and sometimes there's been confusion also between state policy that aims at ensuring that there's no opposition groups, political opposition growing, and using laws against terrorism to actually arrest opposition leaders. So that's been the model, but there's also been some evolution in Central Asia with now new policies in prisons to ensure that we apply less strict rules, but try to also build, rehabilitate the ones who've been imprisoned for terrorism. So this is evolving. In Afghanistan, it's mostly been following the American / coalition model, which has been heavily militarized as a response to counterterrorism. That looked also at cutting financial ties, financial system for terrorists. But the problem with this approach is that it has only been focusing on very specific groups, Al-Qaeda, ISI, the Taliban, and not necessarily of the dozens of other groups, including the IMU that Jennifer was just referring to right before. And so the impact has been limited in scope and also in the way of addressing those issues. So now, what are the opportunities? I am not going to repeat what my colleagues said much better than I will ever say, but there are a lot of opportunities at this very moment. There is a slow realization also that the solution that have been brought so far is not working very well. So I think countries in Central Asia and Afghanistan are ready to actually start maybe planning better than what they have so far, or at least changing a little bit the way of working. There is also a clear recognition that radicalization is a threat and should be taken from a global, like a regional perspective. There are interesting structures that can be built on. One is the regional anti-terrorist structure, RATS, that was established by the Shanghai Cooperation Organization back in 2006, and where Afghanistan is an observing member, and Central Asian countries, except for Turkmenistan, I believe, are full members. And then the opening of Uzbekistan is going to play a major role in this opportunity to work together in combating this this threat at this level. The fact that the Taliban may be part of the government at some point in Afghanistan could also be an opportunity in the medium term, insofar as at the beginning they will have at least to show their willingness to cut ties and to combat violent groups, terrorist groups. So at least at the beginning, and that opportunity should be taken as urgently as possible. Now, what's the way forward? First of all, I think what is extremely important to highlight is that those groups have been successful. Any of those radical groups, either some of them are non-violent, but promote a literalist Islam, which then serve the basis for recruiting, combatants. But all of those groups have been extremely successful in a way because they do not know borders and they understand cooperation. And I think this is what Central Asia and Afghanistan have to mirror in their own approach, to copy and to see how they can better cooperate to gain the type of success and better combat them with a similar model. And that's really where I would see this cooperation between absolutely key and necessary. So that means that Afghanistan should not be seen as a threat, cannot be isolated, and if Afghanistan is isolated, this is absolutely a recipe for failure. Promoting more research, and I'm very, very interested in the work that Dr. Roman was just explaining, because this cross-academic exchanges and learning is absolutely fundamental to also better understand what are the causes of this radicalization across the region. The cause is not, that Islam is not going well, but society's governance and a number of other issues need to be fixed. And research and exchange could really help define better strategies across borders. And finally, I do believe also that cultural cooperation should be at the heart of security and peace cooperation between Central Asia and Afghanistan. This is going to build this strong link between society and decrease all those ethnic tensions that we see across Central Asia, within Afghanistan, and between the borders of those different countries. And so this should be part of how Afghanistan and the Central Asian countries work together, promoting, strong cultural links, which is inclusive, not only on one specific language, but really trying to build it in an inclusive manner. And I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anne. That was definitely, you addressed some really key important points that you don't tend to hear much in terms of the kind of cooperation that Central Asian countries and Afghanistan can build. I'd like to now move on to the Q&A part of this webinar. And there are some specific questions that have come up from your presentations and the discussions. And I'll address the first one to Jennifer, noting that there's a strong theme about economic participation, that a greater integration of Afghanistan and Central Asia can play in creating a peaceful environment in the region. There is a debate that in all peace processes, there are, you need to have incentives to bring parties to agreement. And while the economic realities and benefits seem clear, there have not been enough so far to achieve breakthroughs, particularly between Afghanistan and Uzbekistan. And my question, I guess, is given the opportunities that we've discussed today, how can those be packaged or communicated or used as an incentive to the parties that are delaying the peace process, whether that is parties inside Afghanistan or outside, and how can these economic opportunities be inserted in a way into the peace process so that they can really act as a pressure on the different parties to come to an agreement. I'll allow you to address that if that's all right with you. I think you're on mute, Jennifer.
So this is a question, and I'm really glad that you raised it. And I'm sure Dr. Mogilevsky will also have some insights into this question as well. Some thoughts. First, here's where the regional players become very important in this. So it's hard to talk about key economic incentives driving the relationship between Uzbekistan and Afghanistan at this moment, except the opportunity to trade with one another, right? Trade is a huge economic incentive that drives growth. So you don't necessarily need aid packages to do this. You provide markets, and markets can generate growth. So that's really important. So you're increasing the size of the Afghan market by providing enormous opportunities to export. And you're doing the same for Afghanistan. And what Uzbekistan, for example, really sees, and this is, I don't want to discount the importance of the other countries in the region, but in terms of a country that can provide the economic incentives, right now, the two strongest economies in Central Asia are Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is very natural resource dependent. They're facing some challenges right now because of COVID, depression of the oil and gas market. Uzbekistan is not as resource dependent as Kazakhstan, but also Uzbekistan shares a border. So these issues become very, very important. Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, I think, as Dr. Mogilevsky pointed out, are in a very good position to provide a model. And that model has not been appreciated in the past 20 years inside of Uzbekistan. Inside of Afghanistan. You've had all of these donor projects coming in trying to build Sweden when Afghanistan has a Soviet economic model and has had a Soviet economic model since 1956. This isn't something that just started with the Soviet invasion. It actually goes back a very, very long time. It's the way the Soviets imported advisors really helped build the economic system inside of the country. So as the country, the past 20 years, I think many of the reforms that the country has really stumbled with in terms of economic policy, even politically, stem from the fact that outside actors were trying to reform a system that they didn't understand its inherent logic. And so having spent many times in the former Soviet Union, I came to Afghanistan and I said, well, this looks familiar, right? The whole economic system, the budgeting model, so many things. So in this sense, Dr. Mogilevsky is entirely right that there has to be more learning from the experiences of places like Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. But their economies are so weak that they really can't provide. So going back to your question, they can't provide the kinds of economic incentives that we're talking about really in any meaningful way, except for providing, trade and so forth. This trilateral relationship between the United States, Uzbekistan and Afghanistan is very important potentially because the US can think about ways it might support these incentives, whether that's providing support for infrastructure, the cargo ports that we're talking about, for railroads. Uzbekistan very much wants this railroad that goes to Herat, right? That links Mazar-e Sharif, with Termez to Herat, to provide an alternative to the links to South Asia. That requires investment. It's more investment than the Uzbek government can provide. It would require a lot of investment. So this is where the role of the United States, what role are they going to play in all of this? And I think that's been like the really big disappointment over the past several years is the United States really hasn't had much of a strategy towards this in terms of investment. So they've talked a lot. It's been very encouraging to see the C5+1 process that brings all of the countries in Central Asia together. It's been very encouraging to see this trilateral relationship emerge between Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, and the United States. But where are the resources that are going to support this, right? So I think that's a bigger question. So I don't think the economic incentives themselves will drive this insurgence, will resolve the questions of the insurgency. Those are also political matters. And we can't make the mistake that we've made for the past 20 years in assuming an aid project or sort of economic incentives will solve these problems.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Jennifer. Thank you for that contribution. And I think it's very wise to look at the peace process aside from simply security challenges, but also what is the vision for Afghanistan, and how can we ensure that the economic, the sort of political, the cultural, the other aspects of Afghanistan society can also feed into the peace process. Because once hopefully an agreement is made and we do reach some sort of settlement, the vision for Afghanistan going forward is still blurred. And that's what I think Central Asian countries and other sort of regional players can play a huge role in, and I hope they do. I'd like to ask Dr. Magilevsky if he's got anything to provide input into this, or if not, I can ask, go on to the next question.
Sorry. I really agree with what Jennifer said. Well, there are plenty of opportunities for economic collaboration between Central Asia and Afghanistan. Well, Kazakhstan is a major partner in terms of trade, and probably a large part of wheat flour in Afghanistan is of Kazakh origin. And Uzbekistan supplies a lot of different goods and gasoline and many other things. And by the way, Tajikistan, while small economy but close neighbor, there is quite a bit of trade between these two countries, especially kind of cross-border trade. And we have our campus in Badakhshan area, and there the economic cooperation, well, important locally, it's not much numbers, but important for the local people. So a lot of these, but even more to come if we have any minimum stabilization in Afghanistan. Well, for us, it is very important to have a transit to South Asia through, or to seas, for example. Well, it would be very nice to have a railroad coming from Afghanistan to Iran ports or Pakistani ports. It will be the shortest route and a lot of savings. And by the way, now getting to the Indian Ocean ports is like a really an adventure, frankly speaking. And this is, so it would be enormously mutually beneficial if we have normal economic cooperation established between Afghanistan and its northern neighbors. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Magilevsky. I have more of a specific question for you as well. Having, you looked at the importance of academic exchanges and information sharing between Afghanistan and Central Asia, but what do you think some of the specific ways or mechanisms that this can be implemented are? I think Afghanistan definitely needs a lot more assistance and support in terms of creating a plan for the future of the country post-peace process, but also whether there are any cross-academic operations that we can look at when we want to better understand the cause of instability in the region and hopefully develop better strategies for the challenges across the borders. How can we ensure that this can be implemented practically? And what would you advise or propose that Afghanistan does, whether it's the government or other sort of stakeholders and bodies? How can we ensure that that actually happens, and what some of the first steps should be?
Well, as I said already, academic exchanges are key for development relationships between Afghanistan on one side and Central Asian republics on the other side. Well, there are different, of course, barriers to that. Well, while we are neighbors, we don't know much about each other. Well, our university is perhaps an island in the very big sea of just lack of understanding and knowledge, but that's exactly what we are fighting against. So just providing positive, neutral kind of Afghanistan as a source of opportunity rather than threats or whatever. That's one thing. But in practical terms, of course, well, we need academic exchanges institutionalized. Well, we need networks properly functioning, having mutual research projects. We try to do some of that. We also try to do capacity building also for provincial universities of Afghanistan. It's not my institute's program, but other people at the university work with Badakhshan University, with Bamiyan universities. Well, that's very important on very practical matters like agricultural development, like natural resource management, and small bits, and we are really pleased with this collaboration. Well, while our initial kind of fear was that it would be difficult to find common language. That's completely wrong expectation. Well, it is very easy to find people with whom you can talk and really progress on things. So I think it's just a matter of, first of all, attention to the matter. First of all, we need to acknowledge that's something useful to do. And of course, you need resources, but above all, you need understanding the entry points, having partnerships, and then it will gradually evolve. Because, well, I can share, well, in Central Asia, we don't have much formal collaboration, but we do understand what is going on in neighboring countries, and we try to learn from each other. And I believe Afghanistan should be just included into that process of cross-learning. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mogilevsky. I'd like to now move to Anne, if that's all right with you. You mentioned cultural cooperation, because that's something that we don't hear much about. A lot of the cooperation is either security-wise or economic, but you've come to a very niche, I guess, or quite important point when it comes to Afghanistan's historic and cultural relationship with the region. What do you think that cooperation can look like? And what are some of the key areas that Afghanistan can collaborate or work with these Central Asian countries on?
It's a very tricky question because, and it's a tricky agenda to develop, because first of all, there are, I think, major issue within Afghanistan to define, its history, to define its cultural background, the historical background. So there's still a lot of tension over the history of Afghanistan. There's a lot of tension over the culture of Afghanistan. Every year we have, major debate happening on should Nowruz be a special day or not. And the debates are endless and on so many different topics. So it is important to find ways where it's going to be relatively easy. So try to focus as much as possible on, issues that could easily be a subject for cooperation and for exchange. One of it is, first of all, I think, which is fundamental, and it's not culture per se, it's more than culture, but it's also part of the cultural background of the region, is the setting up again this intellectual platform to talk about the classical Islam. And I think this is one of the most important things to start with, re-energizing this, the ulema who have been, bringing knowledge on what classical Islam is. There is a very strong background in the region of the Hanafi school of thought. And this is, I think, something which is extremely important in also building peace and security. So it's not just cultural per se, it's also looking at religion. There are, so many other things on cultural heritage, including how to preserve cultural heritage. I mean, this you can't really debate much. There are things that are there, like physical building that are there that needs to be preserved, that could be, better understood, the history of it. Okay, that's something that could also be a topic for exchange. But what is important really is to just create dialogue and link. And for the moment, this is really missing, whether I sit in, and of course, as my colleague was saying, this all academic also exchange. This in itself builds ties, and you know, when I receive, you know, hundreds of CVs maybe in a year, almost everybody, 95% have diplomas either from Pakistan or from the West. And when you see all the wealth in terms of academic life in Central Asia, it's very depressing to see that. So all of this will help then build better, you know, better understanding in the region and stronger ties at all different levels. So yeah, there's a lot to do, but there's a lot of homework to do in Afghanistan to also be a better partner, because right now we look a bit messy in the way we present ourselves.
No, you're absolutely, oh yes, yes, go on, Jennifer.
Yeah, no, I think this is actually a really important point. And I think it's something that we need to spend a little bit more time on, because this is the glue that links people together. And I think, as Anne has noted, that there's not this cooperation. You don't see many people from Central Asia or people who were trained in Central Asia working inside of Afghanistan, Afghans themselves. There were so many barriers to this before. Not too long ago, the Uzbek Ministry of Education established a training center in Termez for Afghans. And this is an Afghan educational training center. They provide, you know, some agricultural training, but also some Uzbek language training for teachers inside of, for Uzbek language instructors living inside of Afghanistan, because those resources have not been developed very much over the past 20 years. I've had people contact me because, you know, Afghans I know, and even Central Asians, who say, we really think what's happening in Afghanistan is so important. How can our country be more involved? You work in Afghanistan. I'm an American, right? They're asking me how they can be more involved in what's going on in Afghanistan. Want to support education, want to support the establishment of universities that are joint universities between the two countries. There are certain vehicles like the OSCE Academy in Bishkek, you know, the Central Asian University, which is very important, that have been always open to Afghan citizens, but these are very small. How can we increase these numbers? I think this would be a really important role in establishing these educational exchanges. So it's nice to see that this is being done in Termez. I'm sort of hearing mixed things about that institute. It's very, very small, but this is the first step, right? This is the first step after especially with relations in Uzbekistan have been closed for so many years. It's been so refreshing to see this as a possibility. Can that be expanded to a place like Samarkand or Bukhara, where they speak Tajik, right? So this would be really an amazing experience for so many Afghans, I think, to see some of the cultural similarities between these great centers of learning. They would provide insights into the classical Islamic heritage that Anne's spoken about. So there's so many opportunities for exchanges and for the development of education. And you know, if I were a policymaker sitting in Washington or Tashkent or Almaty, this is really where I'd be focusing my attention. But we all know that education is a long-run investment, and people are really looking for short-term gains.
If I can just add something, reflecting maybe on the French-German experience, and I'm so sorry to make this parallel because it's always feels a little bit far. How did we rebuild this, as Jennifer was saying, this glue between people after quite a big trauma or series of trauma? It's basically by doing exchanges between classes, between schools. And this is definitely something that could be considered in, you know, thinking about small towns in Afghanistan, you know, schools doing exchanges in a small town in Tajikistan or in Uzbekistan would have such an impact in how the youth, you know, portray themselves within the world as well. And same thing, you know, for the Central Asia, to see Afghanistan really as a potential partner and start turning themselves with Afghanistan toward Afghanistan. So those types of things really also in response of the types of cultural exchanges that could be done.
Thank you, Anne and Jennifer. You're absolutely right. I think we share, Afghanistan shares such cultural and historical ties with Central Asia, but you don't tend to hear much about it. And in Afghanistan itself, it's not promoted. For instance, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, even ethnically, are very close to groups in Afghanistan. But I think unless we promote that and find that mutual understanding, that bridge, to be able to have a long-term cooperation plan and that friendly relationship will struggle, I guess. So we've got to be able to look at it in long-term rather than short-term. So thank you, Jennifer and Anne. I want to mute. I think Madam John has a question that she'd like to ask our panelists. So I'll give the floor to you, Madam John.
Thank you, Ms. Nasimi. Just a quick question. Ms. Murtazashvili highlighted a really important point where Central Asian countries and the United States are often in discussions and trying to promote economic projects within Central Asia, and then using that as an incentive as well to ensure that there's a positive cooperation between Central Asia and Afghanistan when it comes to the peace process. But they oftentimes the promises and commitments of funding are not met through. In Afghanistan, we found the same experience. The US Silk Road Initiative is a perfect example. All the commitments made under that were quite grandiose, yet in terms of actual commitments, in terms of funding, the United States never came through. However, someone did come through, and that was China. And China, and I'm referring to the One Road, One Belt initiative in particular, has played a more robust role in Afghanistan within these regional economic projects. And they're doing the same in Central Asia. So my question is, because even between Uzbekistan and Afghanistan, there's also a trilateral committee between China and Uzbekistan and Afghanistan. And they've been playing a great role in trying to ensure that there's smooth transition of cargo through Uzbekistan and then eventually coming into China. But my question is, with Central Asia, with growing I guess difficulties and challenges in perspectives between China and the United States, what influence could this have on Central Asia, and then what influence can that thereby have on Afghanistan necessarily? Because I think China is going to become a huge economic player, if it not already is, in Central Asia. And is that going to prevent these incentives that the US will be giving Central Asia to play a positive role in the peace process, or will China fill in that gap? What could this look like in the future? And what can Afghanistan do to prevent itself from becoming another victim in this type of new proxy? And this is a question for for any of the panelists who wish to answer it.
So, I mean, this is a huge question, and I'm glad you raised it because I think it's so central to all of the things that we've been talking about. And let me sort of take a step back and sort of frame this in terms of the U.S. hasn't made good on many of its promises. Maybe China has made good on some of its promises, but those promises often leave countries in worse shape. So if you look at what's happening in Kyrgyzstan, what's happening in Tajikistan, where China has been very, very involved, the role of China has played an enormous role in major political scandals, in deeply indebting these governments to China. And the United States, but China's involvement is obviously, it's not a bad thing. It can be a potentially very positive thing. And the US has looked at it actually until a couple of years ago as generally positive. They've stayed away from the Belt and Road Initiative. They supported it, I think, as long as they felt that China wasn't using it to gain leverage over individual countries. And so, what role, how is China using these economic relations to develop its own foreign policy? So China has made good on some of these issues. What role does debt play in all of this, right? That's one thing that the US hasn't done. Maybe the US hasn't delivered on some of these things, but its relationship hasn't caused these countries to go into deep debt spirals. You can't talk about China in Central Asia without talking about Russia a little bit, right? And so there's increasing cooperation between Russia and China. That relationship is sort of uncertain, especially when it comes to Afghanistan. So I think that, it's one thing, you know, the United States is currently talking quite tough about China and countering China's influence in the region, but the United States hasn't delivered on any of these promises, really, economically. Well, it hasn't really promised much. It was Hillary Clinton's Silk Road strategy and all these northern distribution networks and all of these things that we saw over the past 10 years. But these strategies were really, I didn't see them as regional economic development strategies. I saw them as sort of wartime strategies. And so now that Afghanistan begins to think of its future without war, hopefully with a peace process, there's ways that it can develop these relationships. So yes, China can play a very important role. The debt issue is something that the country should be very wary of. And of course, you can't talk about China. How is the Uyghur issue involved in all of this, right? So there's increasing public sentiment against China in Central Asia because of this issue. How is that viewed inside of Afghanistan? So and then how is China going to recover from, you know, it's also experiencing some economic shocks as a result of COVID. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of uncertainty. We shouldn't see China's involvement as good or bad. We should understand what it is. But the bottom line is I think countries in Central Asia, regardless of China, Russia, the United States, really just begin developing integration and markets amongst one another. You don't necessarily need China to do that for you, right? So there's been so much waiting. Oh, well, the US didn't do this or China's doing that. The Afghan government has agency, the Uzbek government has agency. Use that agency and craft their own regional strategy. It's time.
Maybe I can just jump on that because I can't agree more. China will be an opportunity if we are able to propose something to China. And for the moment, whether it's Central Asian states or Afghanistan, we are a bit, sitting and looking and being scared or being hopeful, but we're not really proposing a solution. What is China's objective? Obviously, is to become the most major economic power in the world, military power, and to do so, they don't necessarily care whether, the peace and security issues should be dealt with in one way or another. What they care is that there is some types of stability so they can continue their business. And so if there is no proposition on how to bring this stability, they'll bring a solution. And that will probably be, the authoritarian way to do it. Maybe that's the good way. Maybe there's some better way, but it is up to Central Asia and Afghanistan to come up with solutions. And probably it's similar things with the US. The US is a bit tired of the region, but they still have interest. And as long as the agenda that are developed, the strategy which is developed by Afghanistan respond to the general interest, we will be supported. And for the moment, we haven't been able to bring this offer to also get the support that we need to receive in terms of infrastructure. If we bring a solution to the headaches, the threats that are recognized by China as threats, if we bring them solution, they'll also support it. So I think that the Chinese ambassador was saying, we're happy to invest in Afghanistan if we know what will be our return on investment, right? And this is really what we have to bring to the table, which we haven't been able to really, and we would have more clouds to negotiate that if we were coming as a group of countries together.
Let me also contribute a little bit to this burning topic. I really agree with everything what was said. I actually did a paper recently on the impact of Belt and Road on Kyrgyzstan, on my country. And well, yeah, I agree with what was said, that well, there is kind of a great opportunity and also a lot of risks in terms of debt and some other things. My only point to add to the previous discussion is that for us as Central Asians, we in Afghanistan, I believe same, we should not be part of this game. We should not allow to use us as a kind of as instrument in this complex relationship between United States, China, Russia. Well, this will be difficult, but I think that's absolutely imperative for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we've probably come to a close to our webinar, but I will probably have a few minutes to sum up, and then I'll give the floor back to Director Mariam Safi to give her final remarks. But thank you all so much for joining us today, and this has definitely been one of the most important topics on the peace process that we've had. Some of the things that you've mentioned, whether it's the economic cooperation, the cultural, or the security role that Central Asia can play, these are all vital elements of.
So I'll take this opportunity to first thank you all for being a part of this webinar. The conversations have been extremely insightful, and I think there's so much for us to take back with us, to unpack, and to look at further. And I just want to say that I really, truly, on behalf of myself and my team at DROPS, we thank you all for being with us. I wanted to add here that this webinar is a part of a series of webinars that we've been holding in the last few months. And this is the third webinar, and our fourth webinar, which will be coming up in September, our fourth and fifth, we'll be looking at Afghanistan-China relations specifically, and we'll have one where we'll be looking at Afghan-US relations specifically. The webinars we've already have looked at. Our very first webinar was on Afghanistan-Pakistan relations. Our second webinar was on Afghanistan-Middle East relations. And all of these topics are related to one particular theme. And the theme is Afghanistan's bilateral security relations with key neighbors, both in the near and farther region. And this is a part of our Women in Public Policy Journal, which we had published last year. And so we wanted to get some of the findings of our journal out there, and to also have a more in-depth discussion on the recommendations that our authors had presented. In today's webinar, some of the key points that really stood out for me was that as Dr. Mogilevsky mentioned, that Central Asia is in an advantageous position at this present moment. It has an advantage to play a positive role in the Afghan peace process. And he highlighted two key points. One was its experiences, its own experiences in conflict resolution, both successes and challenges and failures, and the lessons learned that we can take from that in Afghanistan, and also its non-threatening approach towards the matter when it comes to Afghanistan. And that's always a breath of fresh air when there is a non-threatening approach in this process. And so having a key ally when it comes to Afghanistan and Central Asian countries as a whole would be very important. And the view from Afghanistan has always been very positive towards the role that Central Asia has thus far played in the peace process. And they're positive moving forward as well. And our research indicates similar trend. With regards to Uzbekistan, more than any Central Asian country, we've definitely in Afghanistan seen an opening of relations. The changes and reforms that have come about in Uzbekistan both has transformed its relationship with its immediate neighbors, but also, of course, with Afghanistan. And we've seen this in many railway, fiber optic projects, railway projects, international highways that Afghanistan is looking to build and connect itself, as well as oil and gas, etc., energy-related initiatives. Those initiatives are part of Afghanistan's RECA initiatives, as part of what it wants to do in regards to the Belt and Road Initiative, and also bilateral, one-on-one trade cooperation between the two countries. And I want to say that that this has most certainly changed Afghanistan's how Afghanistan was previously perceived by both Uzbekistan and other Central Asian countries as a security threat. And we most definitely in Afghanistan see this this changing, and this is quite promising. it is very important to note, as it was on the role that US has been playing in promoting a trilateral relationship and encouraging Uzbekistan and other Central Asian countries as well in participating in the peace process. But in terms of some of the difficulties that we may still continue to face, one is still the IMU issue, which continues to exist in Afghanistan, and how they will be treated, IMU and other actually international terrorist organizations in the peace process, or once we have an agreement, is truly a determining factor. And it's also something that we're trying to sort of decipher in Afghanistan as well, as to how this would actually look. There is a lack of clarity on this right now, but it is definitely something that research organizations and think tanks and policymakers in Afghanistan are trying to see how that looks like and how that is going to look. And in terms of the point that Ms. Fowler had made with regards to how negotiations or the Afghan peace process or an agreement or a formation where we have the Taliban actually join the Afghan government could act to reinforce the position of regional international terrorist organizations is a really, really interesting point. And it's one that, that I haven't seen a lot on, but it is such an important point because this could, in one way or another, mean a reinforcing of their relationships, a transformation of their relationships, thereby allowing the Taliban to actually have a new relationship with these organizations, and one that may not cancel out their commitments in a potential agreement. And so that is that's an important point that we're gonna look out and we're gonna watch for, and that happens. And I just wanted to end with a really great statement by Ms. Fowler. I really like this, and where you said that radical groups, violent or non-violent, have been successful because they don't, but they know cooperation and cooperation with each other. And Afghanistan and Central Asian countries should take a similar approach. I think we're all in agreement that that is most certainly an approach to take. So with that, once again, I'd like to thank you all for being here with us, and we look forward to continuing our discussion with you in the future. And we'll have our webinar up on YouTube shortly, so you may share that with your networks as well. And so once again, thank you and a good evening.